Welcome to the fifth round of second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament 2024. Tournament is halfway. We are seeing the fifth round. The 4 rounds are over, and in the 4 rounds, we finally have a sole leader. Grandmaster Deepan Chakravarti leads the field with a score of 4 out of 4 points, but we have as many as 11 participants on 3.5 points. It's not going to be easy. And on the top board, we see a game between top seed Grandmaster Inyan, also of Tamil Nadu, and Grandmaster Deepan Chakravarti, also of Tamil Nadu, Madurai. The games have begun, and let's come to the moves. D4, Inyan always plays this opening, and knight f6, c4, e6. A standard way of both the players playing, knight f3 and d5. The queen's gambit declined. So we have a standard variation, one of the most popular variations for last over 100 years. I think there are several world championship matches played in this, and Deepan has played h6 very quickly. It means it's possible that he is going for not the classical setup where h6 is not a good move, but apparently Tartakor variation named after German Grandmaster Savili Tartakor. Let's see how the game goes. Castles, a standard way, e3. Both the sides are planning their play, and now comes the idea of Tartakor. Instead of playing a passive setup with c7, c6, Tartakor wants to hit back in the center immediately. What is the reason for this, for trying to hit back immediately? The c8 bishop, black's c8 bishop has a lot of restrictions. It has no good move, it's only one move, and white has a very strong pawn in center, d4. So logical play would be to challenge d4 and also to create some good square for the c8 bishop, and both can be done by this specific idea, b6. A logical move, and black wants to play c5. This move was played by many great players, including Garry Kasparov sometimes, but in the World Championship, it was Boris Spassky who played it against Bobby Fischer. A very popular opening where black wants to play actively rather than making the normal standard moves. Bishop e2, a quiet variation. C into d5 is a more common variation, and knight b d7. It's also possible to play bishop b7 first and also to play c5, knight b d7, and now white takes 3 into d5. So an interesting position has arisen now, and let's see the possibilities. Black has an option of taking with the pawn or with the knight, and with the pawn would be more solid, with the idea of playing c5 quickly, hitting white's center. White is ready to castle, so it's going to be a interesting game. As I said, Deepan is the sole leader, and there are 11 players on 3.5 points, half a point behind him. Let's go to board 2, where also we have 2 very strong players. International Master Ratnakaran of Kerala Railways, and we have Alexei Fedorov from Belarus. So a standard opening by Ratnakaran. I think Ratnakaran has always played this e4. I myself have played only this opening. So yes, a standard setup. I have seen this occur earlier in a few games here. A standard setup which was popularized by Bobby Fischer and very successfully, and many other players. Black doesn't have any problems in the opening. Black is able to equalize quickly, but at the same time, white keeps the position flexible, and it's going to be the game between these 2 players rather than following games of a world champion and one world champion against another world champion. A comparatively rarely played move with the intention of making it a unusual game rather than the established variations. g3, bishop g2, standard way, castle, and rook e1, queen c7. Rook e1, there's an alternative to rook e1 as well. Fischer tried moves like knight h4, but black has correctly avoided this possibility, because knight h4 would, after knight h4, if black moves the knight on f6, white would have to retreat. So at this moment, it's not a productive idea. So when black has developed the bishop to d6, then knight h4 comes in picture, because it's not possible to get e5. But now, with bishop on e7 for black, white wants to play e4, e5. Standard plan for white is to push e5, play knight f1, pawn h4, knight h2, knight g4, taking all the pieces to the king side for an attack. Black's plan is to advance the pawns on the queen side till they come and directly in contact with the queen side pawns. So final plan would be to play b5, b4, a5, a4 and b3, and white's pawn chain gets disturbed and black gets a decisive penetration on the queen side. Similarly, the white's plan, white tries to get a decisive penetration on the king side. So a very balanced opening. No advantage to either side, it's only the skills that's going to matter. Queen c7, queen e2, b5. As we see, logical play started by both the sides. Knight f1, yes, they've been playing what has been played over 100 years back. d4, new move in this position, perhaps with regard to classics. This move was not a very popular move and not a very common move. A few decades ago, maybe a century ago, this wasn't considered to be a great move, but recent games show that this is very much a possibility, and black tries to play e5 followed by c4 rather than keeping the pawn on d5. White pushes e5 immediately, otherwise black gets a good center with moving e5 himself. Knight d5 and h4, standard way of playing, creating a square for the knight on f1. So knight goes to h2, knight goes to g4, and then white tries to push the king side pawns h5 and h6, try to get decisive initiative. Black has already started the initiative. Excellent, a very sharp game, and white is ready for king side attack to checkmate the opponent, and black is ready to simplify the things and penetrate on the queen side. e5 pawn and d4 pawns could become weak, and that could be an additional factor in this specific position. So a very interesting game has now arisen, a position has arisen. Let's go to the third board now. Sham Nikhil plays against Nitin, and again they go by the standard move. One of the most popular moves, unlike the previous game, the second board game, which was a uncommon position, we are now going to see the most common variation here, though with a different move order, but we have actually reached the Sicilian Najdorf variation, which is one of the most popular systems here, and popularized by almost all the world champions. It has been played by, it was a main weapon of Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov. And Kasparov played only this way, so did Bobby Fischer. And yes, it is today's masters. Almost all top masters play this position from both sides. A very fertile position with lot of scope to improve your position by way of your imagination and creativity. And the static features are less and the dynamic features are more. A very nice opening. So standard line. White suggests a draw with this move, or white wants to test. Okay, and now white doesn't play for a draw. White just wants to show that I can play bishop e3 and you go knight g4. I have a draw. In the opening, there are some variations where the best moves by black lead to a draw. So very often, someone has to change those established moves. So white just tests it once and goes for a different setup, altogether different setup. This has been popularized by mainly by Kasparov, but the greatest contribution to this position from white was by Karpov, who won several games, including the World Championship match against Boris Spassky and many other matches, the World Champion Series match. So bishop e3, a standard line, one of the oldest variations in this system, and now comes, it's a slow system where black standard move is bishop e6 and the game goes on. b5 is a mistake here because of both a4 and direct knight d5. Bishop e6 leads to a normal position, after which white has several options. After bishop e6, one option is to play f4, popularized by Karpov. One option is to play king h1, the move of Kasparov, which had never been played before, and a lot of other moves like queen d2, the oldest move in this position. So we have a balanced position, and again we can see a fighting game. At this stage, everybody wants to win their games, everybody irrespective of white and black. till round 9 we are going to see fierce battles. Everybody wants to go to the top spot, and they're all in the second position except Dipan, who is at the top position. Fourth board, yes, we have players from Iran playing against each other. Okay, too early for, no, this is Odiamea, not Odia. Yeah, okay, so this is player from Goa, a talented international master who is playing for a Grandmaster norm here, Odiamea, and then we have Tabaj Arsh from Iran, a standard opening, knight f6, d3, bishop c5. We have got a slower version of the Italian game, the popular one, the Geico piano or the Italian system, which is popularized by around 4 to 5 centuries ago by world champion Greco. And the idea is that both of them complete the development castle and then aim at hitting in the center. The move d3 leads to a slower game compared to the regular moves. Castles, d6, c3, a6, a4, bishop a7, rook e1, h6. Black is worried about a pin after bishop g5, so black wants to play h6, knight bd7, knight bd2, castles, b4. So Amaya already plays a sharp line. Undoubtedly this move creates some weakness, but it's the most principled variation. White plans to push b5 eventually, driving away the c6 knight, and then play d4, which would attack the e5 point. A possible measure is to move the knight to e7 and g6 and advance, or the other one is to wait for b5 to be played and then move to knight to e7, a standard variation. And we have got a very interesting position. I think in this particular position, black seems to be better prepared because black has hardly taken any time and white has taken over 30 minutes. So I think something which has not been prepared by white. We'll see a very interesting game here. Two very strong players playing against each other. All the players on the top board are really very strong, and let's see how the games go. On the fifth board, we have Egyptian Grandmaster Hisham Abdul Rahman playing against Madhya Pradesh star Prakhar Bajaj, who has been scoring very well in the earlier rounds, 3.5 out of 4, excellent result so far, and I'm sure that MP chess are ready to spring some surprises in this tournament. Excellent performance so far. Prakhar, let's see. This is the standard opening called Nimzo Indian defense. As we discussed, this response by black is known as Indian defense, and there are various Indian defenses possible depending on what second move black plays. There's old Indian defense, King's Indian defense, Grunfeld Indian defense, Bogo Indian defense, and Nimzo Indian defense, Queen's Indian defense. Depending what are the next 2 or 3 moves, the opening will be defined, and we have this Nimzo Indian defense named after Grandmaster Nimzovich from Riga, one of the modern strategists. A standard play, Rubinstein variation popularized by Botvinnik, but mainly Kasparov in his match against Karpov and many others. Bishop d2. Popular move which has, I think, a contribution of the competitive chess, because such a move was generally not considered as a healthy move before, but these days we see this is a very common move, and white wants to play bishop d3 next and get e4 quickly. White wants to build a strong center, and black tries to counter the idea immediately by hitting in the center. White develops the position in a slow manner. We're likely to have a pawn structure which will be similar to Tartakor variation, but the hanging pawn structure, only difference will be white bishop will be on d2, whereas on the top board in Tartakor variation, the white bishop would be outside the pawn chain. It would be on h4. The pawn structure would be the same. The plans could be roughly the same after black plays c5. How quickly black plays c5, that will depend on the sharpness of the position. Bishop e7, yes, black is now going to play c5 in a move or two. There's a reason for the retreat, and bishop b7, black is ready for c5. Castles, c5, and f4. Interesting ideas, strengthening the knight on e5, and logical recourse would be to attack the d4 point for black. So black's knight c6 becomes a natural move, threatening to capture on d4 at right movement, and then knight e2, overprotecting the pawn so that there's no danger to the knight on e5 or the pawn on d4. Black gets knight to e4. Black wants to drive away the white knight with a move f6. The knight has just vacated a square for the pawn. Black pawn could go to f6 and drive away the knight on c6, bishop e1, and now black is thinking f6 directly doesn't look like a very easy move to play, because bishop into e4 is one of the possibilities as well, but the main is knight into knight, and after knight into knight the position is still complex. This particular pawn structure was popularized by American Grandmaster Harry Nelson Pillsbury over 120 to 130 years back. It is a very interesting position. White tries to push f5 and then puts rook to f3 and h3, tries to go for a kingside attack. Black tries to expand on the queen side and win the game by virtue of creating a passed pawn on the queen side. So interesting game. Let's move to the board 6. Here we have two strong youngsters playing a complex system. Again a Sicilian defense, but not the Naizov this time. It's the classical Sicilian defense. Antonio Vianney Di Cunha from Mangalore, Karnataka, is playing against P.V. Nandita, woman grandmaster from Tamil Nadu. And we have a very sharp position. Before the Naizov variation came in picture, this is the main line of Sicilian, and that's why it is called Sicilian classical. White has various options here. One is to play bishop g5, that's a Roser attack by Russian Grandmaster Roser. Another is Suzin attack, that is bishop c4, which is main weapon of Grandmaster Suzin. And we have another systems, English attack, that starts with f3 and bishop e to the Boleslavsky, Openersky variation. So Openersky used to play bishop e2 and e5. There's a lot of work by Boleslavsky, again from USSR. So a lot of theoretical options, and let's see f3. Okay, the modern approach, the English attack, double-edged weapon of course, e5, standard play, and white will probably castle on the queen side and black will castle on the king side, and the battle not only revolves around d5 square but also a pawn ruler exposing the opponent's kings. So white is going to play with g4, h4 and g5 and h5. Black is going to play with eventual b5, a5 and driving away the knights, and let's see who is quicker. It's going to be a very complex game for next 15 moves, after which things could clarify. A move trying to discourage the long castling but giving away an important square, perhaps a strategy, and black goes queen to b8. So black is ready to drive away the white knight with a4, which is to go to the back. So white's a4 looks a logical move, but once white plays a4, it's very difficult to castle on the queen side, and black is ready to exchange on d5 or to play bishop d8. Bishop d8 looks like the immediate plan on the agenda. Bishop c7 of course is a possibility which could win the pawn on d6, and it could be a complex game with white king in center. It looks like a tough decision to play, perhaps a well-known theoretical position, though I have not come across this. Probably a move recommended by computer engines, and not that I have come across this. So let's look at this position, very interesting position I must say. Let's move to the next board. Second seed Boris Savchenko. Queen d4. This variation was not a very popular variation till Carlsen started playing it, and he played even in the World Championship match against Vishwanathan Anand in 2013, and the game ended in a draw. So now it has become a very complex variation because many people have tried. Once world champion plays a variation, everybody tries to play that. The more games this theory develops, that is how theory develops. Top player plays the moves, and when the top player plays the moves, everybody follows the suit. And as you follow the suit, more games are created, more data is created, and more options are tried, explored, and then we have a theory developing, or we have a complete opening. So let's look at how the things go. Bishop e2, okay. Knight c6 queen. One of these ideas of Carlsen, not to develop the knight to c3, but to eventually play c4 and then develop the knight to c3. So white is now ready to play c4, but okay, h3, a safeguarding move, and castle, rook d1. So white wants to delay c4, but white also keeps the flexible option of this move. White wants to play e4, e5 first, and black permits e4, e5. So black is not worried about e5. Black would go knight d5. So again a complex line. c4 looks like a valid option here apart from other options. So what is the clock position? Both of them are comfortable. Arya Omidi is from Iran and Savchenko is from Russia. Let's move to board 8. Here the players are on 3 points, and in the third spot, let's see how the game went. Nilasha and Avinash Ramesh. b4, the third move, ambitious move. b3 is the common move. Idea with double fianchetto, perhaps white would like to develop the other bishop also in the fianchetto g2. Queen b3, okay, quite an ambitious play on the queen side. Before starting the development of king side pieces, white already wants to prepare for an attack on the queen side. And a5, b5. Black should now try to put the knight on c5, knight d7 and knight c5 looks logical. And rook e8, a precautionary move just to make sure that sometimes there is a e4 possibility of pushing e4. I think black has a comfortable game. Knight d2. So a comparatively strange way of playing. White is not intending to castle, though the next moves would be probably g3 and bishop g2, and then eventually castle. White is trying to expand on the queen side. c4, c5 looks like a strategic break, which is not very easy to get. And d3 to d4 always remains an important central break, but it's not easy to get this. I think black is in a comfortable position. Let's move to board 9. Saptarshi Roy Chowdhury, a talented grandmaster from Kolkata. He had suffered a loss earlier in the round, and that's why we see him not on the top tables. So, Queen a2. So Saptarshi Roy Chowdhury has a very original and unique style, and he plays his own openings. He doesn't go by the standard openings. There's a move that was played first by Russian champion Mikhail Chigorin, and Chigorin played this successfully against Dr. Sigbert Tarash in their match and won quite a few games with white. So it's an interesting opening. c5, knight f3, knight c6, c3. This is a modern touch to the opening. In this position, Chigorin over a century ago, or rather 120 years ago to be precise, started playing move g3 here, or d3. d3 was not considered to be good, but g3 was played, and c3. So white eliminates the options of black playing knight to d4 anytime, e5. Bishop e7 was one of the options, followed by d5. d5 is strong, g3, g6. So more or less we have a position like a closed Sicilian now. The loss of tempo by black, first e6 and then e5 is not very significant, it's all right. h4. So white wants to play a sharp game because he is playing against the strong strategist Igor Glick. Glick, a Russian now settled in Belgium, is a great theoretician, and his strategic skills are very high. He is able to hit at the right plan even in a unknown position, and that's why it's important for Saptarshi Roy Chaudhary to take the position out of the normal path, which would mean that it would be a game between those two. On most of the boards, there will be one player will be theoretically stronger than the other, one who has studied better or one who has had more time to study, and then the other player takes a path of creating some new position by playing a sort of unusual moves, a proper way of playing. I think bishop g4 is a possibility, h6 is also possible, queen d2. So complex move, white wants to play d4 quickly. So what could be the purpose? One purpose is to prevent black from castling. The main purpose of queen d2 is to prevent black from castling. As you see, if the castles, then the h6 pawn is weak. White would also meanwhile plan to play d4, hitting the central squares. Logical play for black could be bishop g4, but after castles, black doesn't know what to do with the king, and if black castles on the queen side is going to be a very sharp game. If black manages to castle on the king side with the help of h5 or such moves, there is going to be a comparatively slower game, and I think yes, the moves surely has confused the theoretician. Let's move to the next board. Here we have Sri Lankan champion playing black against Saurabh Anand of Bihar, who had won under-9 national championship, and I think also national junior, that's under-19 championship. Let's see how the game goes. Queen's gambit declined, and bishop b4. Now we have something similar to Nimzo-Indian or Ragozin, depending on where white develops the c1 bishop. So bishop g5, we have a Ragozin variation of the Queen's gambit declined, a very sharp opening, popularized by many top players. Among the Indians, Koneru Hompi has played this variation very successfully with black. Kasparov has been playing this position for white, but many top players have played this position with black. e3, bishop f5. So black has got a free game, bishop e2. The pin along the h4 d8 diagonal is not dangerous because if bishop into knight, black can take queen into pawn without losing the d5 pawn, because white knight on c3 is pinned against the king. The king on e1 for white doesn't enable black to or doesn't enable white to take on d5, and black has several options here. The popular option is to immediately hit with g5 followed by c5. Other one is to play comparatively slower game. Direct c5 is also probably possible, but not all that great. g5, bishop g3, knight e4. The absence of dark colored bishop on c1 d2 diagonal to guard the c3 point is now causing some anxious movements to white. There is a threat of pawn, the knight to be captured, and then black would win a pawn as well as a rook, and white has to start defending against the threat. White has not castled, so black goes c5. Aggressive setup by black. Black wants to immediately start the attack on the c3 point with queen to come to a5, but surely white is ready to castle and there may not be much staying in the attack. But let's see how the game goes. Pawn into pawn, and black has the option of queen a5 or taking on c5. Queen a5 looks more logical, though white could play bishop e5 as well, but that is knight c6. So complex variation. We have black taking more time than white, but both players seem to be taking their own time, and probably a reasonably known position but not a completely known position. We have a lot of possibilities, a very sharp game as well. Here we have Ayush Sharma playing against Gautam Krishna, the aspirants of international master norms, grandmaster norms, they are all playing here. The tournament has attracted 131 participants from as many as 16 countries, and 4 continents have been represented. We have a large contingent from Asia, including India, but the other countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Iran, UAE, and Indonesia, Vietnam, and South Korea. South Korea has made appearance in such open tournaments for the first time this year. After the Asian Games, I think South Korea has taken it seriously, and we have a strong player from USA as well, a player from USA, a player from Peru, South America, and players from Egypt and Zimbabwe, Zambia in the African contingent, and we have Europeans from Belarus, that's Belarusia as it's called, and also from Ukraine. We have players from Uzbekistan, and we also have players from Belgium. So 16 countries represented, a prize money of 21 lakhs rupees for this tournament, which has 10 rounds. Today is the 5th round, halfway through the tournament. 10 strong grandmasters are playing in the tournament. 2 women grandmasters. Women grandmaster is a parallel title for women in the women's section, and the 2 women grandmasters are playing here. We have as many as 25 international masters trying to make the grandmaster norms, and we have title holders, more than 50% title holders. Out of 131 players, there are 66 title holders who have received some degree from FIDE, and they are fighting for the higher degrees and the prize money. We apart from this masters event yesterday, even the challenges event was inaugurated, which has attracted 268 entries, and there are some foreigners from Bangladesh and from Nepal and from Sri Lanka. So also from Zambia and Zimbabwe, the players are playing in that category as well. The players with a rating of 2000 are eligible to play in the masters, which we are seeing, and the challenges which started yesterday has players who are not eligible to play here. The tournament is for them, and they also have a very good lucrative prize fund of 14 lakhs rupees. So a lot of things happening, and of course the beautiful venue of IPS Academy has been offered. This is the second time they're conducting a big tournament. Last year, same time, they had a national under-9 championship, and now we have this. Let's look at the sponsors of the event, because no tournament takes place without sponsors, and we have sponsors such as Indore West Management, and we have Red Cross Society, we have Path Foundation, we have Navin Florin, we have the Goel Group Indore, we have HDFC Bank, Dilip Buildcon, Kirloskar Brothers from Maharashtra, and Mega Developers. A lot of important companies, including a bank, sponsoring the event, and we are going to have prize money of 35 lakhs totally in both the events. Number of participants has crossed 400 now total. Let's see what happens to the next game between Ayush and Gautam here. Knight f3, a simple opening. It's going to be a English opening or a King's Indian defense. So going towards the King's Indian defense standard line, and the Garry Kasparov popularized this. It was played very successfully by Bronstin Boleslavsky, the Russian Grandmaster, Soviet Grandmasters, and then the greatest contributions to this position were by Bobby Fischer and by Garry Kasparov. The standard way of playing it. The real master of this position with black was, the first real strong master of this position was Boleslavsky, and Boleslavsky's son-in-law, world number 2, Bronstin, David Bronstin. They really laid the path for black's action and black's plans here, and certainly Fischer and Kasparov contributed a great bit to the path which had been laid down by this erstwhile Soviet Union players. They were from different parts of Soviet Union. So simple line, the most popular line, A6. This move has become popular for last 2 decades. This was not the way Fischer and Kasparov played. So it's a different idea. Black wants to expand on the queen side. Black wants to play rook b8, and then black plays c5 and b5 and tries to expand on the queen side, thereby weakening white's grip on e4 square and d5 squares. So rook e1, because the knight could eventually be driven away after rook b8 and c5 and b5 by black, and then b4. So the e4 point could become weak. So white starts strengthening it, and rook b8, black is ready. A move to discourage c5, but then now black can occupy knight e5, because earlier knight e5 had its own problems because of possibility of f4 after guarding the c4 pawn. Now queen e2. Complex nature of the position leads to a very strange decision, and queen on e2 in front of the rook doesn't logical move, and and then black would be probably be making some other move. The queen cannot go and support the d6 pawn. It's clear that black will have to give up the d6 pawn sooner or later. So rook d1, perhaps b5, offering a pawn, and we have a complex position. Material will be imbalanced because black is offering a pawn or two, and the purpose would be to open up the g7 bishop, established a knight. Strongest Indian players once, about 3 decades ago, and twice national champion, plays against Aswath, a talented youngster. And we have got a position similar to Catalan opening, but not a Catalan opening because white has not yet played. d4, a6, queen c2, c5, a very popular line where white wants to play a slow game and black wants to play active position. In spirit of the position, white advances on the queen side and tries to create a strong position. Black seems to be fine here, and although black has taken a lot of time, black has taken more than 50 minutes by now, but black seems to be on the path of equalizing. Only problem that could be is lack of development, and black needs a couple of moves to castle, bishop e7 and castle, and let's see how the game goes. We move the board 13. So here we have Sahil Day from West Bengal playing against Mritika Malik. Mritika Malik is also from West Bengal. She's just won the National Junior Girls title. She had just won this National Junior Girls Championship held at Jalgaon a couple of weeks ago, and let's see how the game goes. The Karakan defense, and then we have interesting option. This opening, which was considered to be inadequate opening, has suddenly become one of the most popular variations of Karakan. And for knight into f6 check, the Russian system was to take with the g pawn, but the modern aspect is to take with the e pawn. And this is a position which is looks very complex because black has a solid position. Black has no concrete plan, but black plays solid moves, and black wants to play a interesting sharp battle against white's play. Black has no direct plan of sharp play, but as white plays sharp, white probably castles on the queen side, and then we have a complex game taking place. Black immediately wants to open up the center. To my knowledge, the more common moves are rook e8 and h6 here, knight d7 as well. There's a famous game with g6 and white played h4, and those possibilities are also there with c5. This move offers bishop into pawn check, and I think invaluable tempo is lost. After bishop into h7 check, king h8, white must bring back the bishop, otherwise the bishop gets trapped. And meanwhile black gets two moves for the pawn, and before white can attack, black starts attacking the king. So knight e2, and now it's necessary to guard the pawn. Now various options are there. One is to play h4, one is to castle, one is to castle on the queen side, queen c7, h4. Yeah. So after safeguarding the d4 pawn, white goes for h4 and h5 and a king side attack. It is clear that white is going to castle on the queen side. Black makes a committal move. This move drives away the white bishop from the crucial from the attack of g6 square eventually, because after bishop e4 the bishop could be driven off by f5 and f4, and we need to see how good black's initiative is. Looks at black with all those tempos seem to be doing very well, and black could play rook e8 next and then bishop f5. White has to retreat the pieces, but in long term if nothing happens then these pieces could become weaknesses, although I find that after bishop d2 rook e8 black should be better with bishop f5 to come. Yes, indeed played, and bishop e4, otherwise black gets bishop f5. So knight d7, the knight is ready to attack the bishop. Strategically a very well played game by black so far. I prefer black here clearly. Knight f6, so white has to play this f3 move, and now black has to make a plan. Taking on e4 would allow white to get a strong center, and the f4 pawn would be lost. Let's see, white has a easier play, but black has initiative, and it's also possible to play a confusing move like queen e7, and white takes on f4 and black takes on e4. Let's move to the next game. Here we have S. Dhananjay of Chhattisgarh playing in the neighboring state, and we have Marat Zumev from Uzbekistan. Zumev has been playing in India for the last 2 decades and is one of the most popular grandmasters among the Indians. He is very friendly and plays an original player who doesn't believe in the theoretical part of the game and is always ready to checkmate the opponent. So a player who plays to win all the games, a sharp player, and the sharp move, striving for the center in spirit of his style and the very common line. This position has been played even in the World Championship match between Karpov and Korchnoi several decades back. A very strong position. dc5 too early, I believe. Bishop b5 is a more common move. Bishop into c5. Black could end up a tempo up, because usually white captures d into c5 and black has actually developed the bishop. So here I feel that black has active position and extra tempo than the routine lines, where the pawn would be on already on c3. A strategic plan, he wants to exchange the bishops. One plan would be to push d4 if there is no tactical problem in this. So readers could analyze the move if something like d4, knight into d4 is possible, and it's an interesting question. So let's see. So d4, if possible, then what does white do, and can white take knight b d4? And if knight into d4, then bishop into d4, then bishop into f3. The viewers may analyze themselves and find out. And let's move to the board 15 then. So we have the Vietnamese Nguyen playing against Vivan Vijay Sarogi. So let's see, Nguyen is also playing for his norms, and so is Vivan. So a popular Sicilian defense, and oh, interesting move. This move was a great strategic depth. This was first played by one of the greatest attacking players of all times, Grandmaster Alexander Alekhine originally of Russia, who played for France after the Soviet Revolution, and is still considered to be one of the greatest geniuses in the field of chess. And this move has a great strategic idea of defeating your opponent with a strategic play. Let's go. Grandmaster Valery Salov used this idea successfully against Serbian Grandmaster Ljubovic, and said that I hoped that my opponent did not know Alekhine's game and I would be able to win the same way. And in fact, although the moves were different, the same strategic path was followed, and Grandmaster Salov has won a very nice game. But yes, Grandmaster Alekhine's game here remains the main game. Yes, we have a sharp option. I think here the old variations were d into e5, bishop into f6, and white won the games in a beautiful manner. Black plays knight c6, where bishop into f6, gf6. I believe that black has failed to equalize, and I thought maybe a move like castles was more natural. Knight c3 allowing a pin here, and white goes queen d3. So for d4, perhaps white is going to castle, and then d into c3 is not possible. White knight would be ready. I think black has not equalized here. Also look at the time. Nguyen has made a right guess because he has taken only 3 minutes, and probably Vivan has played this position for the first time. He has consumed more than 1 hour. When you are playing against a player who is comparatively inexperienced to you, it's very common that you think of, okay, what is my opponent not likely to know? And that I think quite a good choice, I must say, because the Vietnamese knows this position well. The Indian has not yet grasped the position, and the position is already better for white. So sometimes we learn by bitter experiences, but doesn't mean that the game is over. Game is still on, and white does have some chances of equalizing, but I think I prefer white here for various tactical reasons. For example, after d into e4, queen into d7 check, king into d7, we have a long castle check. And we also had knight g7 check in the for d into e4, but I thought it's good to play queen into d7 check, a long castle check, and king e6, then pawn into e4, and if bishop into c3, then rook d6 checkmate. So there are various possibilities here, and black will not be able to justify the weakness in the pawn structure as there is no adequate counterplay. So if I had a look at this grand event, second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament being held at the IPS Academy, as many as 16 countries participating. We have started how the middle game of these openings of these games have begun. We have seen top 15 games. So also B category tournament, which is the Challengers tournament, of which we are not going to show you the games, but surely it's also fighting tournament. A total fund of 35 lakhs rupees as prize money has been given, and the games are at the beginning phase. I'll be back with you about half an hour. Do watch these games. The games would be progressing, and you could make your own guesses and then compare the analysis subsequently when we discuss these positions. So see you in half an hour's time. Welcome back to the fifth round of the second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Championship being held at the IPS Academy here, and we had seen the opening portion of top 15 boards. Now the games have come to a middle game, a proper middle game, fighting middle game. Let's see how the game goes. This is a top board game between Grandmaster Dipan Chakravarti, overnight leader, who is on 4 points from 4 rounds, and we have as many as 11 players, including the top seed in Grandmaster Inyan on 3.5 points, and the game is between Inyan White and Dipan Chakravarti. The game started with a Tartakor variation of the Queen's Gambit declined, and we had seen the basic moves where play was more or less standard. This is the Tartakor variation, that's this move particularly by Grandmaster Tartakor, Savile Tartakor of Germany. So white goes for a simpler system, bishop e2, and white takes the pawns. White goes knight e5 and knight into e5. Looks like a theoretical option because it is going to be some confusion about the material. A d5 pawn could become weak, and let's see what does black have on mind. Black gives up a pawn, and what does black get? If white takes knight into d5, then black has queen into e5. But what happens to queen into d5? Interesting question. Black must, the rook could be attacked, and whether the rook is to be taken or to be saved, rook can't be saved, the black has to play knight into c3. Looks like a theoretical variation. Knight into d5, queen into d5 looks attractive, but obviously there is something drastically wrong after knight into c3. So knight into d5, a simplified move, queen into e5 and queen d4. I think black is likely to lose a pawn, but the c7 pawn could become weak, and after queen into queen, pawn into queen, we have option of c5, you have option of giving up. I think black has a very comfortable game here. Even if black loses a pawn, white king is still in center, white pawns are weak, and probably black should not have a problem. Black gives up the pawn, knight into pawn, and the knight is attacked and the knight is saved. The problem in knight b5 might have been a6 and b5 dominating the knight. It's rook c1. So a risky move because the knight is trapped. If it would be attacked, it would be lost. So knight c5. It's also possible to play rook d8, rook f d8, attacking the pawn. But then white wanted to play bishop g4. So knight c5, a tactical move, attacking the knight. The knights are exchanged. The c5 pawn, which is pinned, that is attacked. G2 pawn is attacked. White guards this. Black has played b4. Black has played rook c8. White can play b4, but then black takes pawn into pawn. So white goes king f2 and rook into c5. Black has completely equalized, and perhaps black is a bit preferable, but black plays for a simple ending. I think the game is heading towards a draw, and although there are no realistic threats, players are playing out of inertia. I think white just wants to play this position, though nothing can be achieved from this. And I think a move like g5 also could be a very easy way of playing it. Yes, black has completely equalized. So excellent opening preparation. g5 is a good move, planning to play bishop g6 check, drive away the king, and we could expect a simple result of a draw here. Black need not play g5 as well. Black can just play bishop d7 followed by bishop f5 check. Black has various ways to draw. I think it's a fairly obvious draw and a good game. So whatever be the results on the other board, Dipan continues to be a leader, although may not be a sole leader. Most likely Inyan goes to 4 points after this game, and Dipan goes to 4.5 points. And let's see how many of them can catch. Okay, king c5, black plays. Not that black has really any realistic winning chances. Bishop d7 looks like a wise move, and bishop f5 check, apart from other moves. It's not known why black players, it seems that both the players are still trying to win this position, but it looks like a simple draw to me. Let's move to board 2. We had left this at the opening stage where no action had actually begun. Black had just offered a pawn with c4 and white had started attack, not taking the pawn, and white really goes for kingside. This is typical Ratnakaran. Ratnakaran always wants to attack the enemy king, and black has lesser pieces on the king side. The white pawn on e5 has a drastic effect on the king side defensive position, because the knight on f6 has been driven off. Knight on f6 prevented white entry at h5, and it was also guarding the h7 point. And now that it is no longer there, white plans to attack. Should black play h6, white just comes back knight f3, brings the other knight to g4 and makes a sacrifice of a piece on h6 with a crushing attack. Black goes for immediate counter. Black wants to open up the position, and white closes the position. White moves queen, attacking. Bishop into knight, a committal move, and pawn into bishop. So now we see a pawn sacrifice. What happens to knight into e5? That remains a interesting question. What happens if black plays knight into e5? Can the viewers find out what happens there? So in case of knight into e5, there could be bishop, and white could take bishop into d5 and pin the knight with bishop f4. And the knight on e5 could be in danger, because the moving that knight would lead to loss of queen on c7. So interesting way of capture. And black ignores the pawn. The e5 pawn is not contributing to white's attack, and it's not important to win that pawn. It's more important to break through white's camp, and knight b4 looks like a logical plan. White has a very dangerous plan: knight g4 and knight f6 check, sacrifice a knight, and then after pawn into knight, take pawn into pawn, and then try to checkmate with a queen and a pawn on f6. So knight g, while white has a clear plan of knight g4 and knight f6, let's see what black has. Black has taken this pawn, so let's see what happens to bishop into knight here, and pawn into bishop, bishop f4. The knight could be in trouble here, but black has the resource f6. So although black's position gets weakened, here is no concrete way of playing. Black has guarded. Both the players are taking a reasonable amount of time. Black has got absolutely winning position on the queen side, and if white doesn't get any adequate threats against the black king, white is going to be in trouble. Let's see. Bishop h6, a logical move, attacking the rook. Where does the rook move now? Because white keeps the option of moving the pawn to f4 and then giving a check at e8 if black knight goes to a wrong square. So rook move was expected. Queen f7, interesting move, trying to drive away the queen. The white can't take the rook because the queen is hanging, and if white exchanges the queen, the rook captures the queen, which means that the rook is guarded. White's logical move could be queen h4, attacking the rook as well as attacking the d4 pawn. So queen h4, and rook has saved itself, and now white wins first pawn. We can see, white recovers the pawn with queen into d4. What happens then? So white had given up a pawn for initiative. White actually got some initiative, and white is ready to win back the pawn, and taking the pawn would also attack the c3 pawn. So let's see. Sometimes it's not normal to win just by the kingside attack. It's not adequate many times. Many times one has to get something else by the way of the kingside attack. And queen into e4, that doesn't seem to be any tactical, great tactical possibility. But yes, black could play queen h5, attacking the bishop, and then there would be a threat of some combination. So complex position. For the first time, I see Ratnakaran has taken more than 50 minutes for the game and the complex position has arisen. Whether white should play queen into d4 or not. If white can't play queen into d4, then eventually white may land in some trouble because the c2 pawn by black is very strong. Black wants to play bishop f5 and take on d3 as well. And white must quickly do something or take the d4 pawn if it's possible, but queen into d4, there is queen h5 and a very tactical play giving queen into d5 check and bishop e6. We have a very complex position here. Should white recover the pawn or not? Let's move to game 3. Shyam Nikhil versus Nitin. Already a lot has happened. Yeah, the Sicilian defense and the standard variation. Here there are three plans rather. One is king h1, that's Kasparov's move, and f4 which is common before from the Karpov times or even before Geller's move, and Karpov played it many times, and knight d5. Immediate action which does not really lead to any complications. I think this is a variation played by Nakamura for the first time, but it doesn't seem to give any advantage. Black should be okay. Black wants to find space on the king side, and black has extra pawn on the king side, so black wants to play f5 and then e4. So moving the knight to h6 would lose the h5 pawn, moving the knight to f6 would lose the f5 pawn, and that's the reason why the move e4. So it gives away the square d4 for the knight, but white queen has no useful squares. Queen must go to c3 or to g3, and then white is ready to bring knight to d4 and e6. Black is ready to advance the pawns, so black doesn't get f4 here, but if black gets f4 here, this looks like a standard, I think, as a strategic variation probably, because now we have a forced sequence of moves coming. What happens for bishop h4? The queen moves, and then the f4 bishop is hanging. This knight into f2 looks like a very sharp game. Perhaps, I think the speed with the players are playing, it seems that they know this position, both of them, and white could sacrifice knight into f2 or bishop into f2, attack the queen. Okay, queen d2, and there comes bishop into f2 check, rook into f2, knight into f2, knight d4. So this everything looks like home preparation or existing theory. Some top player has played this before. Queen h4. Black is ready to make a draw by perpetual check. Bishop f1, knight into pawn check, pawn into knight, queen g3 check, rook into f1 check. Oh, queen g3 check, that was bishop g2, so rook into f1 check, rook into f1, queen g3 check. White can't play queen g2 because then queen into e3 check is hanging, and which means that white must agree to a draw. Black has taken only 19 minutes for the entire game. White has taken only 2 minutes for the entire game, apart from the additional time of 15 minutes each, which means that this is something which has been played before by Carlsen or Nakamura or Anand or some other player. I'll not come across this game, but obviously this is like a home preparation. Both the players knew this position in a simple draw, so they are going to be in the second spot and not at the top spot. Both of them have reached 4 points out of 5, 2 draws each. Let's come to the next game. Odiyame of Goa playing against Grandmaster Tahbaz Arsh of Iran. So we had left this game at this stage, and the ambitious move b4 was soon played, knight e7. We had left at this stage, and let's see how the game went. d4 immediately, yes, because the absence of knight on c6 enables white to play d4 without losing the pawn. The move that was not possible a previous move, because of the presence of knight on c6, is no longer prevented. It's possible to play this move, and white takes this, and black breaks through in the center, because otherwise white would have a very strong center. So d5. It's very common for white to move the bishop to b3 before playing d4, so that when white gets d4 is able to get a strong center. Here the center has been challenged, c4 bishop and e4 pawn are attacked, e5. So now it becomes e into d5 would be bad, because after knight into d5 white has weaknesses all over the camp and black has better development, better pawn structure, more active pieces, and white would have no reason to play that, but white goes for sharp move e5. Had the black knight not been on e7, this move could have been easily met with pawn into c4, and then pawn into f6, the knight, and queen into f6. But because the knight has moved to e7, now this e4, e5 is possible, which means that white is going to have better center control and chances of kingside attack. But black also has excellent chances of attacking the d4 pawn with the help of the bishop on a7. It's already targeting the pawn. The c8 bishop could come to g4, pinning the knight, putting more pressure on d4, and the black knight on e7 could go to f5 or c6, putting a lot of pressure against the d4 point after black safeguards the knight on f6. So the first thing is to safeguard the knight on f6, white safeguards the bishop then, and then the game takes place as black tries to put pressure on d4 point and white tries to checkmate black by moving all the pieces to the king side. Knight f1, knight g3, knight h5, and then a sacrifice. So white bishop would go to d3, the knight would go to g3 and h5 and sacrifice on g7, because black knight wouldn't be on f6. So knight e4, excellent move to prevent the counter attack. White gives up a pawn, black gives up a pawn, and obviously the pawn is guarded now, but c4 pawn is weak and could be lost eventually. If the pawn is not lost, then black could really be better after knight d5. So white has to try to win this pawn so that there is at least some justification to the white color weakness. Queen c2 and bishop g4. White was threatening interesting mating attack. Bishop into h6, pawn into h6, knight going to e4 to f6 check, and queen h7 mate. And for bishop f5 there will be queen into c4. Black goes bishop c4 and allows bishop into h6. Okay, interesting. So black is obviously not going to capture because it allows mate in 2, but black is going to spoil white's king side. So both the players will have a weak king, and black is now ready to take on d4. So black has gained a pawn, black has regained the pawn, black is threatening to win a pawn on e5, black is threatening to exchange queens with queen d3. So I think black has a good game. Let's see where Ameya took a lot of time, because Ameya had big advantage in terms of time, but strategically black had a fine position. And here bishop g4 and bishop into h6, played quickly, that was the idea, and bishop into f3, a standard move, g into f3, and queen into d4. After queen into d4, now this is a position which is completely different than the earlier position. It has a completely different features and several possibilities, and now we have Adi Ameya thinking as what should be the course of the game now. Very important situation. White has more weaknesses and white wants to justify those weaknesses now, and if white is able to create some threats, white could be in a good position. But if there are no threats, then eventually black could be better. As you can see, though the material is equal, black has a centralized queen, and if queens get exchanged, then the white pawns become weaker than black pawns. Black has a good pawn structure, so it's going to be a positional game. And let's see what Ameya, because it's taken more than 40 minutes. It's taken more than 45 minutes rather for this move. From 65 minutes is down to, okay, I think something wrong with the clock there. This looks like a correct time, and queen e6, queen, okay, we had a lot of moves played, rook d1, queen attacked, queen moves and attacks the bishop, bishop goes and attacks the knight, and queen goes and supports the knight, and now these moves were played, and the clock was surely wrong because Amaya still has 30 minutes and black has 35 minutes. Tabaz has played a sharp continuation, and it needs to be seen how the position is. Knight g3 looks like one of the possibilities. A sacrifice on f6 is not impossible. Knight f6 check and bishop into f6. There, bishop f6 looks like an attractive move, and black could play queen f5. Then, so after the safeguard, one has to safeguard the knight first. So yeah, so bishop f6 looks like a real move threatening knight g5, and black probably must go knight to g6, and white has knight g5 anyway. A game which will be decided by king center attack and not by the positional features here. The good bishop, bad bishop and weak pawns are not going to decide the fate of this game. The king position and the safety of the king is going to decide the fate of this game. So one who is able to attack the king in a more skilled manner will be the winner. If black defends, black is going to win. If black doesn't defend, then obviously black loses. So sharp position, excellent game between Audiame and Arsh Tahbaz. Tahbaz is from Iran. Let's move to board 5 now. On the board 5, we have Hisham Abdul Rahman of Egypt playing against Prakhar Bajaj, the challenge from MP. I think the only player of MP who is playing in this tournament. So standard way, white wants to attack at the king side and black wants to expand on the queen side. So f6 trying to break the pawn on e5 is dangerous for black because it prevents black pieces from getting into defense. So black wants to exchange that pawn. White wants to penetrate with knight to e6, not a very great idea because after here there is a threat of knight e6, but after pawn into pawn, knight e6 makes no sense because black will take the rook on f1 first and then save the queen. So pawn is immediately captured. Very committal play by white. White wants to play queen g4 and go for mating attack. Bishop g5, preparing to exchange a few pieces. Queen g4, d4, opening up the game. White bishop needs to be moved to a suitable square here. White bishop prevents the coordination between two rooks, and that's the reason why black has some initiative. Although I think this position is good for white, probably there must be some attacking chances. Yes, if nothing happens, black, what happens to bishop c4 check? Bishop c4 check, and then king h8, and then queen h5 threatens a checkmate. Okay, let's see how the game goes. A lot of complications are going to take place after moves like bishop c4 check or a simple move bishop g3. Although bishop into e4 is a possibility, but not to be taken seriously because there is no real hope. The bishop on g3, bishop on e1 must move somewhere quickly, otherwise the f1 rook remains unguarded by the other rook and the a1 rook is not likely to take part. I somehow like white's position because of the chances of a king side attack, and let's see how the players carry on. I can see a variation with bishop c4 check, king h8, bishop h4. And bishop h4, there is knight g6 check. A combination looks possible. Bishop c4 check, king h8, bishop h4, bishop into h4, knight to g6 check, pawn into g6, rook into f8 check, queen into f8, and queen into h4 mate. So bishop c4 check and bishop h4 is a possibility, threatening combination attack, knight e6. Let's see. Looks like a strong contention for white. Bishop c4 check and bishop h4. Bishop into bishop cannot be played. So knight f6 can be met with queen into g5 or pawn into f6 as well. So bishop c4 checking and bishop h4. The bishop is not attacked, so there could be aegis, but there are serious threats and serious chances of kingside attack. Let's see bishop c4 checking h8. Well, you could analyze this position yourself. Bishop c4 checking h8, bishop h4, and why capturing the bishop with the bishop is bad. And then what could black really do? We'll move quickly to the next game. Board 6. We have Antonio Vianney Dicuna of Mangalore, Karnataka, playing against woman Grandmaster PV Nandita, a sharp player who has played very exciting games in last 2 rounds, and she has scored 1.5 points from difficult position by way of her sense of initiative and tactical judgment. Let's see how she does today. This Sicilian classical was the opening played, and the English attack, and the knight goes. More or less, white tries to roll the pawns on the king side and castles on the queen side. Black tries to roll the pawns on the queen side and castles on the king side. And let's see how the things go. Knight d5, castles, queen d2 and a5. We had seen this move permits bishop b6, which leads to a very complex game. And bishop b6 played and queen b8 and knight into a5. So white just takes the pawn that is free, and white hopes to, yes, white has won a pawn. So let's see, knight c4. Somehow something has gone wrong. But at that early stage in the opening, one is supposed to know the theoretical moves. I don't know if black really knew the move. Bishop e3 looks like a sound move, and white seems to be better after move bishop e3, although white is not well developed, but somehow this move doesn't seem to be, the entire plan of a5 doesn't seem to be all that good. Let's move to the next game. Up to here we are players with 3.5 points playing each other, except the top board where Deepan Chakravarti with 4 points was playing against Inyan, 3.5 points, and the next 5 boards from board 2 to board 6 were mainly the players with 3.5 points wanting to go to the top position, the players on the second side. Now we have players who are playing on 3 points out of 4. Here we have Savchenko playing against Omidi of Iran. Savchenko is from Russia. So, system that has been popularized by Carlsen recently. White doesn't disclose where white wants to. We had left at this position. We felt that c4 was a natural move, and followed by knight c3. That's what we thought. Knight c5, and now yes, white is ready for b4. So black stops it. Knight g5. It would have been very risky to play bishop into c3 to spoil the pawn structure of white spaces. White could even give up an exchange with, give up the e4 pawn with queen into c3, or it was also good to capture with the pawn on c3. So a5, knight g5. Wants to drive away the bishop or take it. a4. Black is not bothered. The bishop, taking the bishop may not be all that good. Black wants to create a vacuum in white's position with moves like a3 and followed by knight b4, and some penetration looks possible. So white goes knight b5, stopping, and we have a game where the Iranian is already down to 8 minutes, and white has not really done much. You must see how significant the Marugzi opening is. The Marugzi opening is a very easy opening to play for white. White just puts the pieces at proper squares and guards everything, and black is always at a loss to know where to put the pieces because of short of space, and white is always able to play more smoothly and more simply by choosing the most obvious options, whereas black has to look for options which are not obvious. We can see that white has some advantage, but most important thing, black has only 7 minutes left. Let's move to the next board. Board 8, Neela Shah from West Bengal. He has kept the king in the center for a long time. This we are discussling. Black kept the king in center. White has kept the king in center against black. Black has really developed all the pieces, and black is ready now to open up the center. A very committal opening by Neela Shah, not castling, but now, yes, he's still ignoring the development of the king side. Probably he believes that the king side cannot be opened, so he's happy with that, and he starts his own way of attacking the pawns. Although the white is uncastled, the position is closed and black is not able to get an advantage of that fact. So h5 here, bishop e2, and one option was to, this the h5 looks necessary. Sometime you may have to go knight g4, queen a4 and c5. So white has a potential strategic advantage of putting a knight on d5. b6, a sharp move. He wants to isolate the a pawn, and surely queen into b6 is met with knight into f6 check and disaster. And even after knight exchange, queen into b6 is still not possible because e8 rook hangs. So knight h7, knight d5. White seems to be dominating here. King g7, bishop b2. White is ready for now castle and f4 or direct f4. Bishop d7. The queen goes back happily to c2 probably. Queen c2 looks like a more logical move here, and it's not easy for black to win the b6 pawn. But even if white wins black wins the b6 pawn, white will still have chance of castling an f4. The b2 bishop is very strong, and the king in front of that really makes it difficult. White has less time, only 12 minutes. But I prefer white now because white is likely to give more threats than black. Let's move to board 9 between Grandmaster Saptarshi Roy Chaudhary of Calcutta, and we have as black Igor Glake, a very strong theoretician who had really made a lot of contribution to chess strategy a couple of decades back, and a very clear player, quite easy to understand his games. And let's see how the game we had left it at this stage. Black is not going to play for d5. h4, interesting move by Saptarshi. h6, queen d2. So black is unable to castle, and that's the reason why Saptarshi has chosen this line. White wants to complete the development and wait for black to castle, and as soon as black castles, you take the h6 pawn, which means black has to find an alternative possibility. White is building the position eventually, wants to go d4. Black plays opening up the position, a risky one, f5, knight h2, long castle. White has one option of h5 here and many other option, f3, a solid position. So white just wants to move the bishop to f2 perhaps and play a3 and b4 open on the queen side, and black, though black has no serious problems, the plan exists. c4, well, a confusing move because it doesn't have a concrete plan, and exchanging on d4, knight d4, and if captured then e into d4 could really lead to some initiative for black. f4, yes, nice move also, because you can't give the h4 pawn some time in future, but gf did make sense here, and he could give up the b2 pawn and take a center pawn. That did make sense. So c4, black pushes f4, the bishop goes to f2, not taking the pawn. White doesn't want to open up the g7 bishop, so why does it take this pawn? Black has closed the king side, the h5. White will play for f4 break, surely, and black will probably play for reaching an ending where black could suddenly have an outside pass pawn. So as long as the middle game is there, the white player's weakness is significant. b4, okay, direct counter attack, queen g2. The first sacrifice in the game, the b4 pawn can be taken, but of course there is a lot of attack possible. The pawn will eventually go. But the g2 bishop is not contributing to the b7 attack of b7 because of the presence of f3 and e4 pawns, and that's the reason why black has a clearer plan. Black just wants to open up the queen side and push the h pawn to h4, h3, pawn into pawn, bishop into pawn, bishop f2, and there goes h4 and h3. h4 would be met with knight g4. So perhaps black also has a dangerous plan of knight g6 and knight f4 or knight h4. So black seems to be preferable here. Let's see how the next game goes. Former national under-9 champion and under-20, under-19 champion, national junior champion of previous year, Saurabh Anand is playing against international master De Silva from Sri Lanka. De Silva has just won the Asian under-18 championship held at Al Ain, and he was really supreme in that tournament. Let's see how he's doing here. We left at this stage when black has a multiple pawn structural damage taken place, but it doesn't mean that the position is bad. c3 pawn is probably weaker than the d5 pawn, so black has no serious problems. At the same time, white has two bishops, and the bishop on g3 particularly is very strong. So whatever be the assets and liabilities, black will have to deal with a lot of weaknesses, and the g3 bishop, white bishop on g3 is supposed to be a bad bishop, is certainly not a bad piece because it has got good scope. It's preventing rook from coming to b8. So bishop on g3 is strong. And what next does white do? The queen must move. So queen b1 looks like a most logical move. Black seems to be struggling for equality here. Knight into c6, okay. Okay, the significance of this move is not very clear. Pin, okay. So black wants to play knight e4 now, and that should be equal, the ending should be equal. So here we have game 10, we go to game 11 between Ayush Sharma and Gautam Krishna. I think Ayush was in a strong position when we left. King's Indian defense, the fianched variation. So knight pawn attack, pawn guarded, c5, knight f3, knight d7. We saw this. Black is playing for b5. Knight into f3 check. I was just wondering if b5 was possible, giving up the pawn. Knight into f3 check and knight e5 is going to take those standard tempos. Now probably is willing for b5 or is willing to play bishop e6. Okay, bishop g4. Exchanging the light colored bishop. It's possible to exchange that as well. Bishop e6, knight d5, b5. So black is advancing, but white has nothing much to lose on that side. Queen a5 or such moves are possible, trying to penetrate, but yes, knight on d5 could move suddenly, and when it moves it could attack d6, it could attack the king side. bg7 has no target, it's doing a purely defensive job. So let's see what does black do. Black plays here, giving up a pawn. No, bishop into d6 can be met with take on g4 first. So king g2, queen d7, queen d2. White wants to play f5. So threat of f5. So simple question, why has a pawn been offered? A free pawn has been offered, which is a free pawn for black. Bishop into bishop, pawn into bishop, queen into pawn. But then white will be able to take the pawn on d6, and attack the rook and attack the c5 pawn as well. So gain could lead to basically loss. Black's natural contention looks like knight d4 rather than bishop into g4. And I think after knight d4, black is a bit preferable. Black's bishop is stronger and a rook can be very strong for penetrating at b2. So pawn into c4 remains a consideration, but knight d4 perhaps even more so. And white has not really got a good position here. Some time back, I think white was okay. It has always been a good position for black, in the sense black got c5 and b5. And even if white wins bishop into d6, the pawn sometime, there will always be some dangerous threats. So let's move to game 12 now. In game 12, we have Ashwat playing against D.V. Prasad. D.V. Prasad's younger brother D.V. Ravi was national sub-junior champion once, and D.V. Prasad has been national champion twice. And let's see how the game goes. We had left this stage a Catalan opening, and white wants to win the pawn. Black plays here, and now knight e5. Knight into e5, bishop into e5, queen d7. Black has an excellent position. Black can play c4 next perhaps, and black has very good position. So you can't allow c4 when the sacrifice is possible. But c4 here at the moment would be too vague. Pawn into pawn, then bishop into knight and castle. But yes, maybe c4 is not, white is not prepared for this. But how to develop the f8 bishop then? If one has to play f6, it's not very desirable. So white drives away the knight e4. Knight wanted to go to b4 anyway, so perhaps not the best move. And now if one has to play rook d1, black would probably have to play f6 and develop the bishop. Yes. And now standard possibility could be bishop e7. Black wants to play d4, white wants to play d4. Okay, so knight into d3. So black wants to support this with c4. So rook into d3, a combination. And now we have a very complex position because the d8 rook is attacked, a sacrifice, and now comes bishop a5 check, and the rook c7, and after queen into c6, black gets checkmated. So in a position which is a reasonably dynamically balanced, a move like knight a6 is possible here, planning b4. Perhaps bishop e7 is also possible, but knight a6 looks strong. In a normal position, black plays this strange move, and after rook into d3 and queen into e6 check and bishop a5 check, black loses everything, because after rook c7, queen into c6, and black is not only several pieces down but going to get checkmated. So I think a blunder in sort of tenable position, but the main issue is that black did not develop the kingside bishop and the rook, and black has played kept the king in center, and needless to say, it's always a dangerous option to keep the king in center. The provision to castle is for safeguarding the king. When you choose not to castle, you are taking a risk of getting checkmated this way. Let's move to board 12. Board 12, Sahil Day and Mritika Malik, both of West Bengal. Mritika just won the National Junior Championship a couple of weeks ago, and that started with the Karukan exchange, Karukan knight f6 variation. And we have this position, black attacks and white defense, bishop f5. Either it could be a great move or it could be a blunder. One has to decide. So bishop into f5 can be met with rook into e2. The bishop must come back to e4, and then chance of doubling the rooks, and the e4 pawn is lost. So the fact that the e2 knight is hanging makes this move possible. Bishop into f5, rook into e2. Pieces are equal, the bishop is attacked. Bishop needs to go to h3, I believe now. Because bishop e4, rook e8 would just lead to loss of a pawn. So bishop h3, queen a5, a threat, so king must guard it, knight d5. Black seems to be ready for penetration. Knight e3 is a threat, rook e1, knight e3. Perhaps a premature when your opponent has already guarded against that. Opponent wants to play queen c1. Why this move? Rook into d2. Oh, this is the idea. Giving up an exchange. Okay, what does black gain by this? g3, white is ready to take pawn into pawn as well. Things seem to be extremely complicated here, but white creates a square for knight into d5, white would have moved the queen, and yes, knight into d5 should be good for white after queen d4. And what does black do? Does black have a tactical resort? Yes, black plays knight f1. White queen run away supporting the e1 rook, otherwise rook into e1 is hanging. The d2 queen is hanging, knight f1 and rook into e1. It is possible to play knight e3, but this is most accurate. And now we have knight d2, threatening knight b3 check, and pawn into knight, pawn into pawn, followed by queen a2 mate. So knight d2 checking a1, knight b3 checking b1. Now we have to see if there is a combination coming, leaving the knight here. There are no rooks and the possible check is not there, and if black doesn't give the checks, as king on c2 would be losing, so king a1. Black has played a dynamic game and sacrificed an exchange and made a draw. At this position needs to be seen if white has a chance of winning with a move such as a3, which could be very risky. Perhaps moving the queen moving the queen to f2 might have maintained an extra exchange because black has no real threats. Yes, I think after queen f2, it's difficult to justify the loss of the exchange, the sacrifice of exchange. White black would probably play queen c7, threatening bishop g3. But yes, such a committal move leads to immediate equality by perpetual check. Yeah, knight d2 check is only move, of course, but king a1 is forced, knight b3 check. So game has ended in a draw. Energetic play by black, although I'm not sure if this position is sound for black. If white moves the queen, thereby taking away the tactical possibility of knight moving to f1, attacking the queen. Let's move to the next game here. We got board 13. Let's go to board 14. Board 14, Dhananjay from Chhattisgarh is playing against Marad Zumev of Uzbekistan. A standard play. We had left it very early. Yes, white has black has one extra tempo because white did not wait for black to play bishop e7. So one extra tempo from the standard line doesn't mean that there's anything fundamentally wrong, but it means that there's more freedom. And bishop into f3. Black knights are good. Knight c6, knight d4, nice move. Knight into d3, rook into d3, rook e8 and queen d1 or queen to queen c3, king b8. Black wants to play knight e5 here, so knight into knight, queen into knight, If G7 is taken, then C2 is going. So I think if queen into queen, then we have a drawn ending. If you take queen into G7, queen into C2, there are tactical possibilities. Rook C3, queen D2, threatening back rank mate. So yeah, we are at a very complex stage, and although the position should be roughly equal unless somebody falls in a trap. And now let's move to the 15th board, the last board that's available. Nguyen was playing against Vivan, and we had seen that this was a one-sided game. And white was in a winning position from the opening, but somehow black has put a really good fight back, and queen d3, bishop b4, queen d3. Here it's not clear why queen into d5 should not be played. Queen into d5 take and knight b4 recovers the pawn, but there should be a problem. Knight c3 looks fine. Maybe even knight d2 was better. Knight d2, queen e2, c3, they could have been better moves. Knight c3, bishop b4. So the pawn structural advantage white has gone. White doesn't have a pawn structural advantage anymore, because white also has weak pawns. And now the game is a complex situation. White wants to win the d4 pawn and knight. So knight into d4, rook into d4, and queen into c4. What happens to black playing knight into d4 here? Black plays knight into d4. If queen c7, king c7, and the knight is strong. And if rook into d4, then queen into c4, and white has rook into c4 check. Black has no time to take on d1. Knight into d4, rook into d4, queen into c4, rook into c4. Black would like to take the rook on d1, but rook into c4 gives a check to black king, which means that black has to now simplify the position. And rook into d4, rook into d4, queen into d4. Black would take on h2. Yes, black has taken on h2, and now black has... Yeah, black is a pawn down, and black remains a pawn down, and then f7 is attacked. And now giving a passed pawn is very risky. So black can't advance the h pawn. Queen h1 check and h5 is possible, but white plays e5 and e6. There is a very fast chance of a checkmate. So white king is running away from the checks. Queen c5 check is intended. White probably puts the queen on f8 here. White can play queen f8 check, and then queen d6 check, and then advance the pawn. Direct e5 is also a good move, because after queen c5 check you can come into e4, king e6, simpler move. e5 looked as good a checkmate threat, so queen must go here. Just takes the pawn. Okay, 2 pawns up, and corrected passed pawns, 3 pawns up. Now you can take only one of them, and now you have queen check, and you have queen check, and you have the nice combination for exchanging queens. There's nothing white can gain by this capture. Both the sides have taken a pawn and lost a pawn, but because white is already 2 pawns up, it comes a check, and a check, and the check, and the queens get exchanged, and the e-pawn queens. So black has resigned here. So that was a summary of the top 15 games which are available. We are here at the 5th round of the second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament being played at the IPS Academy here in Indore, and we have players, 131 players from 16 countries, and countries like USA, USSR are also taking part, apart from the several African countries, Asian countries, even a South American country, Peru, is taking part, and South Korea, for the first time they're playing in the open tournaments. We have a very interesting field, and more than 50% players are title holders. Tournament is being sponsored by HDFC Bank as one of the sponsors. We have Kirloskar Brothers, we have Indore Waste Management, Red Cross Society, we have Path Foundation, Navin Florian, Goyal Group, Dilip Buildcon and Mega Developers. So all these sponsors have made it possible to have a tournament with a prize fund of 35 lakhs rupees, 21 lakhs for the Masters tournament which we are seeing now, and the Challengers tournament which started yesterday, which has attracted 268 participants, and we'll see how the things go. The Masters tournament will be there till 16th. The Challengers tournament will get over on 14th. We have interesting play going on, and let's see how the games proceed. I'll take a break of 5 minutes before we see the games again. Please join me after 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back to the fifth round of the second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament being played at IPSA Academy here. 16 countries and 131 participants. Interesting event. Lot of strong players in this, and out of 5 continents, 4 continents being represented. We have a player from South America, so from Peru. We have a player from USA, USSR, Belarus, Belgium, and African countries, Egypt and Zimbabwe. Many other countries as well. The Asian countries, almost all Asian countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Singapore, quite a few countries, and of course the largest contingent from India. So we had left at this stage the top board between top seed Grandmaster Inyan, who is lagging behind half point to Dipan Chakravarti, the overnight sole leader, and I was wondering why the players were playing, and let's see how the game went here. White played g3 and that's it. The game ended in a draw. As we expected, this game could have been agreed drawn quite some time back, and black plays king c5, white played g3, game ends in a draw. Very easy equality for Dipan, and he continues to be at the top. Whether he will be a sole leader, unlikely, because somebody with 3.5 points may join him with 4.5 points. Let's move the second board between Ratnakaran and Fedorov. We had left at this stage and we were wondering if white should be taking queen into d4 here, which looks like a sensible move. And let's see what happened. Black played rook e8, and we're contemplating over queen into d4, taking back 1 pawn, and position could be fine. And there seems to be ambitious move. f4 doesn't seem to be working, because I think white can take knight into d3. Looks like a blunder has taken place by Ratnakaran. Knight into d3, rook into e8 check, queen into e8, queen into f6. Yes, white threatens mate on g7, but first black has very many ways to guard against the mate, and secondly black checkmates first. So there comes queen e3 check. Now where does white move the king? King goes to h1. What happens? King to h1 is one possibility, and in the game white plays king to g2. Let's see what happens in king to g2. King to g2 seems to allow immediate mate. King h1 was a better possibility. Let's see what happens in king h1. Then queen h1. If knight f2 check, then king goes to g2, and then comes bishop h3 check, and king h1 knight f2 check, king g2 bishop h3 check, and king g1. There is knight g4 discord check, and at least the white queen is lost if there is no checkmate. King f1 allows a mate in 1, queen f2, and king g2. I think this is the position Ratnakaran was hoping for. This is a simple deflecting combination. Black would like to play rook into a2 if the rook was not hanging, but white rook on a1 is guarding the a2 pawn. Black rook is on a8 is very active in playing. See, black pieces in the original pose, bishop on c8, taking away the important h3 square, and the rook on a8, which not made a single move, is likely to checkmate white with rook into a2. And there comes the crux of it, the knight e1. The knight gives a check, and if white takes rook into knight, then the rook into a2 check leads to a checkmate. And if white doesn't take the knight, then surely, if king f1, then there is bishop h3 check, and if king h1, there is queen e4 check and queen g2 mate. So in another couple of moves, white gets mated, which means that instead of simple queen into d4, white plays f4 and tries to checkmate black, but finds himself in the ambush. The game has been lost, and unfortunately from a good position in just 2 moves, Ratnakaran has made a blunder and lost the game. Let's move to third game between, yes, this is already ended in a draw. Third board between Shyam Nikhil and S. Nitin. Fourth game, Odiyame, a very interesting game. Yes, we left it at a very sharp stage where black had a lot of problems. I was wondering if white was going to sacrifice a knight. This is the exact position we left at, and bishop g5, we're wondering if white is going to get knight f6 check or bishop f6, and here we are analyzing knight f6 check or bishop f6, and as well as the option which actually played, bishop into e7, queen into e7 only one, knight f6 check. Knight must be captured by the pawn, otherwise if the king moves to the corner, h8, white queen goes to h7 and checkmates. So now the king is exposed and white is going to bring the rook in play. Is it rook e4 or it's king h1? King h1 seems to be logical. Yes, king h1. And now white wants to play rook g1 check, and eventually the queen will come in checkmate. Black must move the king. What black must create squares for the king. Queen e6. And now after rook check, it was not possible to create a square for the king on f8, because after rook f d8, rook g1 check, king h8, king f8, queen h7 would have led to disaster. So he plays queen e6, trying to put the king at h8, which is a very weak square as well, because the queen could come and give check. So we have rook g1 check, king goes, and now the logical course looks like queen e4 threatening queen h4, direct rook g4. I thought it was sound to play queen e4 threatening queen h4 mate, and if queen h3, then rook g4 would have rook g4, but then bishop into f2 was possible. So first rook g4, planning rook h4 check and rook g1 check with mate to come, or queen h7 check. Black plays rook g8. So white now has to think of how to checkmate here. King g7, the king is trying to escape. Rook g1 check, king goes back. And true that white can take the rook on a8 after the preliminary exchanges, but that may not be adequate, and it may be better to now whether to take the rook or take the pawn with check. There is queen h8 check, and then pawn into pawn check, and the king runs to d7 then, and we have no checks. At this stage, perhaps the queen e4 might have been more direct here. Queen e4 and then queen h3, and perhaps rook g3, then queen h7. Somehow it seems that the queen will be lost in this position rather than the move that was played, rook g4, because rook g8 and the king gets a chance to escape. But we need to see if it's possible to take the rook. Yes, he's taken the rook. Queen into e5 is not possible because of rook e4 pinning the queen. So if black doesn't have adequate counterplay, then white has chosen a correct path. E into f6 check, exposing the king, is also possible. Bishop into f2 looks like the only move here, and rook e4 probably. And then f5 comes. Now this is a position which is very confusing, and black king is not all that weak. In pawn into pawn check, king d7, there are no checks. White rook is attacked, and black could move the queen to d file, where there would be threats with queen d1 check. We don't have any clarity on the position. Somewhere white had a very strong attack, and now we don't know white has material advantage, but the game is not going to be decided by the material advantage. It is going to be decided by the initiative in the attack. Let's move to the third game. Ame already short of time. I think he had winning possibility. Knight f6 check looks like a good continuation. Not the only continuation. Preparatory king h1 was good, but knight f6 check must be winning here. And well, king h1 looks good, and queen e6. Rook g1 check, king h8. And certainly there is a combination possible here. Instead of rook g1, we must first threaten a checkmate, and let's see if queen e4 followed by queen f4 what? Queen e4, and then that would, yeah, queen e4 looks strong, and if queen h3, then rook g4, and if bishop into f2, then queen f4 followed by check on f6. That looked like a very strong condition. Black would have to give up the queen, I believe, because the f6 square cannot be guarded. So queen e4 looked like a good continuation here, threatening checkmate with queen h4. Black must stop with queen h3. There bishop into f2 is possible, but then white could just play something like rook g4 anyway, and the other rook coming. Yeah, but probably he was worried about bishop into f2 and he played rook g4, and there comes rook g8. The king escapes from the danger zone to a position where suddenly black king is safe and white king is weak, but of course white has won an exchange and a complex game. Very difficult to judge this position, and it's going to be decided by the last mistake. The one who makes the last mistake is going to lose. A lot of mistakes are expected here, such a sharp position. Let's move to the next board. Yes, we had left at this stage and were wondering if the combination d4 was a very committal move and bishop c4 check and bishop h4. We are looking at that combination which has actually taken place. Bishop h4. Bishop into h4 would run into bishop c4 check, king h8, knight g6 check, pawn into knight, rook into f8 check, and queen into h4 mate. So bishop into h4, a free bishop. White gives bishop c4 check, attacking the king. King must go to corner h8, and then white sacrifice another piece. Knight g6 check, and there's no square, pawn into knight, and rook f1 goes to f8, takes the f8 rook. Black queen, which was guarding the h4 bishop, must move to f8, and then white takes queen into h4 mate. So this was the move we left, and we're analyzing, and we felt that bishop h4 was a winning move, and apparently that has been played. Bishop into h4, rook into knight, and rook into rook. And a tactical move, if white takes the queen, and black wants to play a knight check and knight into queen. So this knight captured, equal material, queen attacked, and both the bishops attacked. So it's clear that black will be at least a piece down, if not more, and black resigned the game here. Bishop h4, a move that Prakhar missed. We had reached this position. d4 was, I think, a very committal move, a mistake that led to it solved all the problems of black white pieces. Queen e7 was, I think, something a very natural way of playing this position. Vianney playing a solid game against woman Grandmaster PV Nandita. Vianney is from Karnataka, Mangalore, and Nandita from Tamil Nadu. Players who have represented India. Nandita represented India in the Olympiad in 2022. Vianney Dikona has represented India in many age group tournaments. And now he's a pawn up, and Nandita tries to create some counter play. And we have a complex game where white has an extra pawn, black has strong center, black wants to create counter play, and dynamically balanced position, though I believe that white should be in a position to remain better, but with less time it's going to be a very confusing game. Let's move to board 7 now, where Boris Savchenko was playing a standard Marukzi bind against Umidi of Iran, and Marukzi bind is an opening where white plays very slow and provokes black into making weaknesses, and once black keeps on making weaknesses, white gets an advantage due to them. As we already see, a bishop has been lost for a knight, and the game gets opened up. The bishops are stronger than knight. The a4 pawn could turn weak. A decision to play in game is logical here because black would have then two knights against bishop and knight, and since black's king side is weak because of h6, white should really go for maintaining the queen. Knight lands at d4, but with no threat. Knight into d4, and white simply retreats the bishop, and queen. So knight on d4 is the only asset in black's position. If the knight moves, then white pieces would just pounce, and white probably can double in the d file. Yes, rook d3, and the pawn on c4 cannot be taken because of rook into d4 opening up. So let's see, suddenly a few moves have been made, and let's see, rook d. Black will eventually have to play e5, which black plays rook b6 and rook d1 and e5. An interesting move. Now king h1, white wants to break f4, king h4, so chance of king side attack, rook g3, yes, queen c5. Now f4 looks like a standard possibility, queen g4, bishop f6, still no, rook d2, keeping the pieces on black squares when your opponent has a bishop, I don't know, queen c6, queen d1, okay, wants to sacrifice an exchange, bishop into knight, pawn into bishop, rook into pawn, but black has taken a pawn now. And let's see, opening of the f1 bishop, how strong it is, bishop d3, followed by taking on d4, or first taking on d4, then bishop d3, and white queen would go to h5. Let us see how strong the attack is. A pawn has been taken. This is extremely interesting position. White has given up a pawn. White can of course recover the pawn on a4, but that's not the plan. I believe the plan is to hit on d4 and then play bishop d3, or postpone capture on d4, but put bishop d3 and start attacking the g6 point. So a very dangerous attack could take place, and white seems to be better here, but a lot to happen. Now we go to the next board. Nilash had not castled, he had kept the king in center, and he was playing with his pawns and the queen side pieces. Somewhere he had decided to leave a target for the opponent and just take advantage of the fact that no plan is possible. We left at this stage when queen a4, he attacked the pawn, and black closed this, b6, knight h7. That was a move we had not seen. There was a threat of knight into f6, so knight h7, knight d5, king g7, bishop b2. Yes, I think f4 becomes a threat. Bishop d7, queen c2, f5, drives away the knight. King gets out of the pin so that f4 is not effective. And now black should try to play f4 himself, but then d4 could be coming. So queen comes to g5 could be a possibility as well. Bishop c6, okay, bishop c3. Black is going to lose the e5 pawn, but black is trying for counterplay. So knight d4, a nice combination. If white takes pawn into knight, then black takes with the e pawn, and that's a discovered check by the e8 rook, and white loses the c3 bishop. So black gains a bishop for a knight and also gets attack against the opponent king. So bishop into d4 was played, and bishop into d5, bishop into d5, knight into d5, bishop into c5. Oh, tactical battle, knight f4, and black has taken a pawn, attack has begun, king h7, f4 is a possibility to come now, bishop h6, rook g1, knight h4. I would have liked the queen to come to h4 and h3 before the knight was attacked, because now the pace of the attack has been slowed down and white is slowly dominating the position. C5 break is likely. Oh, a committal move. Queen could come to e4 now, and knight could come to e4. Yes, and I believe that while strategy of keeping the king in the center has worked, the d6 pawn is getting weak and nothing is achieved by f3 check, and the f into e3, f into e3 doesn't seem to bear any direct results. The queen is not able to participate. Queen f8 or such move could plan f into e3, but it's still a slow way, and white seems to be better here. Let's move to the next game. Saptarshi Rai Chaudhary was playing against Gleck. It was a position where Saptarshi had kept the king in center and black had a good pawn structure. After h5, b4, white sacrifices a pawn hoping for some attack, but I don't see much of attack coming, and it's possible perhaps to defend the pawn with knight c6 as well. But okay, g5, black counter attacks, and bishop f2, bishop h3. Black is penetrating faster than white. Queen into b4. A sacrifice. Rook g1, one of the bishops is attacked. I don't know if it's going to win the bishop. Knight c6. The queen could come to h3. So I don't know what's the plan in the sacrifice. Rook into g2. So bishop f4. The knight is attacked. Rook into g8. Rook into g8. Knight. The black pawn marches. Looks very dangerous. Black has a simple plan of h3, h2, h1. And white has no way to attack black's forces. White can't give more than one move threats, and black is ready to win this game. So a difficult position for Saptarshi Chaudhary, I believe. Let's move to move game 10, where former national junior champion Saurabh Anand playing against international master De Silva from Sri Lanka, and the position looked very risky for white. A very sharp game from an unusual opening. White has a lot of targets, but white has also compensation by way of two bishops and the strong square on d4. But black is fine. I think black is a nice move because pinning the knight prevents the knight going to e4. Should black get knight e4, I think it's a good position for black. Rook e8, a nice move, preparing knight e4, pawn into pawn, bishop into pawn. Knight e4 looks logical here. b6, okay, so black doesn't want to play for simplification. Black wants to move the queen first. A pawn has been offered, queen into e3 check, bishop f2, and he gets back the pawn. And now c5 pawn will be lost. No, rook e1, he has queen f5, so he remains a pawn up. Queen d2. So unnecessary sacrifice perhaps, but there is compensation. Rook d8 and queen c3, and perhaps a move like g4 trying to attack the white king can be effective. Rook e8, okay. So black is happy with a black is happy with a draw. White could come back queen d2. That doesn't look like the best move. I think black is a pawn up, and black is preferable here, although there is no direct winning line. We still have a lot of chances to both sides. Let's come to the 11th round, where Ayush Sharma versus Gautam Krishna. I think Gautam was in a difficult position once. Now the thing seems to have changed, and knight d4, bishop e3. White's reluctance to defend the pawn. Yes, we left at this stage when black was winning a pawn, and yes, we are wondering if there is any justification to this. Yes, why should white be giving the pawn? Yes, we left at this stage and were wondering if white has done the right thing in giving up a pawn. Black can even give back the pawn with d3 and enter the rook to b2, but I think unnecessary pawn sacrifice, and black seems to be doing very well. There is no compensation for the pawn. Black could play for kingside attack. Queen a4. Okay, so queen b1. So yes, while black is a sound pawn up, and all white can hope is to get an equal game. But in middle game, yes, even a pawn down position could be good. In game, even a pawn down position could be good. But white has to justify the sacrifice of the pawn. I can't see any direct compensation, although there is activity for the pieces. Let's move to the next game. Asat versus E.V. Prasad, who had seen Prasad had blundered and lost this game. A careless move, knight into d3 at this stage, and it allows immediately rook into d3, queen e6 check, and bishop a5 check, and queen into c6 to come. Prasad, former national champion, resigned. We had already seen this full game, and we had seen this draw between He has a perpetual check draw, and there's no way either player could escape. Sailde and Mritika both from West Bengal, and we have Dhananjay still playing against Zumaev. Zumaev complex position. Zumaev trying to get better of it with from a unclear position. Looks like a roughly equal position. C3 would be met with rook into B2, and then D5 pawn is hanging. Black's principle will slightly better, but nothing greater than that. White would probably have adequate chances, although there is a chance of black emerging a pawn up, but in rook endings it's possible to get equal, to get a draw even a pawn down. And then we'll see the, yes, this game, a nice game played by the Vietnamese, defeating Vivan Sarogi. So that's for this fifth round. We are waiting for 1 or 2 games to be over, but the sixth round will be played in a couple of hours, and we'll meet around 4:30 in the evening today to see the sixth round. Join me after 3 hours then, and see you after 3 hours. Bye. This is the fifth round of the second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament 2024, and we are in the middle of the fifth round, and we'll see. I'll see you at 4:30 there for the sixth round. We have a very interesting matches going to take place here.